friends, I'm back again as promised. Today's lunchtime tangle is being substituted once more for a how to create a Pysanky. I hope you had a chance to look at the introduction to this segment that I did last week, and it's really a lot more meaningful to get the significance of the symbols and the history of the Pysanky first before you start making them. So today I'm going to introduce you to how to make one egg. It's being filmed over several sessions because this takes many hours, and I'm trying to cut it down for you so that you just see the significant points and could follow along if you wanted to. So let's get started. Before you begin to even clean your egg, it's really wise to candle them first to make sure that they don't have any fissures and cracks and nicks in them that would compromise the integrity of the shell, because it will not hold up through the whole process of dipping and dyeing and taking out and then wiping the wax off. It's stressful on the shell. So I always candle my eggs, and you can start, sorry it's dark, I have to keep it dark so that you can see me doing the candling. You can start with the flashlight. I actually found that my little headlamp has a better luminosity. So I will show you what I do. I just put the egg on top of the light and I just turn it around and check for tiny cracks. As you can see, there is already, the shell isn't 100% opaque all the way through. You can see that there are little flaws, but this should hold up okay. This is a store-bought egg, and I could not get my typical unwashed farm eggs yet. I have to look into doing that, but I got just large eggs, grade A, double A, and I would not suggest that you get jumbo eggs, because the larger the egg, the thinner the shell. So these should work all right, and also medium-sized ones. In any case, take a look at this, and if your egg looks pretty much like this, without any cracks, and you want to look closely, no cracks there, this one would be good. I candle all of the ones I want to wash, and then we will talk about the washing process. After you've candled all of your eggs, the next step is to wash them. And the reason we need to do that is because they will have been washed with some kind of chemical or detergent that is going to want to repel your dyes. And so we want to get that off so that the eggshell will take the dyes better. You will need 4 cups of water, warm water, 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, distilled white vinegar, or any white vinegar really. It's just to, work as an acidic on the shell. And then I like to use a spoon to drop the eggs in, and also a soft cloth to wipe them with dry. You could use paper towels as well. If it's a little more, it's not going to hurt. And then we're going to just drop those eggs into the bath. Whoops. I'm left-handed, so I better do it with my left hand very gently so as not to crack the shell. If you are lucky enough to get farm eggs, but you must specify to the farmer you would like unwashed farm eggs, and that way you can just gently remove the debris from the egg with a warm water and a soft cloth. But if they are washed, that's when you need to get this solution to sort of prep the eggshell. I only have 11 eggs because when I was candling, one of my eggs was not good enough to withstand the process. This is my first dozen, and you want to make sure that the water bath covers them completely, and just let them sit there and soak for a few minutes, and then you will take them out. And I'm going to just gently rotate them, take them out, and then pat them dry softly with a soft cloth, and then just let them rest in their egg carton. One thing also, if you have dyes that you've made up and you keep them over the years, which I do often, in fact the ones I'm using today are from last year that I made up for my class that I taught, and they're looking just fine. They don't have any, I made them with distilled water, and I also kept them completely sealed off from air, totally airtight, and they don't have any mold or debris floating on top, which means that the dyes should be pretty much intact. However, the dyes can lose their strength, and if you're finding that they are losing their strength and it's a color in which you do add vinegar to the dyes, you can add a little bit more, a couple tablespoons in a quart, to strengthen the dye for this dipping. One important thing to note is when you are mixing up your dyes, follow the directions carefully, and one of those things that you need to watch out for is that you use only white vinegar. Any other vinegar will cause the dyes to mold, like apple cider vinegar. Do not use apple cider vinegar. All right, before we begin to actually work on our eggs, I wanted to introduce you to some really helpful resources for you to do this on your own. Like I said, I learned, if you watched my presentation, I learned from my college roommate who learned from an 80-year-old Ukrainian woman. So I was lucky enough to have, a physical teacher with me. But later on, I moved away and I wanted to do the eggs again. And I was living in Germany at the time, and I couldn't remember exactly where to get my dyes and all of that. So I saw this in the bookstore there. It was a long time ago. As you can see, the book is completely unbound now, and because I used it so very much. This is the same book that you can still get today from the Ukrainian gift shop, which is where I got all of these. I also have one on how to do ostrich eggs. But if you don't, you can't go out and spend all this kind of money. I bought these over the years, one at a time. But if I had to limit myself, I would either suggest you get this book, Eggs Beautiful, or this hardback design book 5, because it is an anniversary edition, and it also gives a lot of really fun information about these women who have become famous for decorating their eggs. They're part of the Ukrainian gift shop family. On this one, I love it because what I'm going to be showing a lot of you here today is from this book. Okay, so like our setup and materials and how to wash your eggs, and why do you put vinegar in some colors and why others not? Why do you use beeswax and not regular paraffin or other candle wax? So all of that is really well described in here, as well as I love that it has like a little reference section for the symbols and designs. And of course what they mean, right? This is a really, really good reference book. This way you can also design your own eggs and not have to follow step by step the directions that they give for one particular egg, which you can also do. For example, not this book, but these books, these design books, are set up so that you can learn also about the whole setup, the basic divisions of the eggs. There's all different kinds. The divisions are very, very important. They act sort of like a string in Zentangle. And then here's, for example, egg number 1. It is shown in color somewhere on the book. It shows you your design, your division, and then it shows how you would then lay down your wax step by step. Design book number 5 has a lot of that as well. I think you'd be really covered if you got those 2 books I mentioned. This one's really nice because it shows you even when to dip your egg, and then draw these in yellow, add your little green spots, And then the next step is orange, and then the final black. Really, this book and this book, I would say, are the most important for now, if you wanted to buy a book. So let's now talk about our workspace setup. Here you can see mine. It's just in the corner of my studio on, I think, I don't know, 5-foot, 6-foot table. I have covered my table, as you can see here, with white butcher paper. And then I've made myself a little working area that includes a mat of stacked up newspapers and then some folded paper towels on top. Let's look at the colors here. I like to arrange my colors in the order of which you usually dip them progressively. We go from yellow and then the greens, which we just brush on, then the orange, and then we go over to the reds. The reds include dark red, scarlet, brick red. You don't have to have all of those. If you just get the regular red, that's fine for now. And then as we progress, we will see that we go over to the darker colors such as brown and black. Black is usually the last dip, unless there is no black in the egg. Here you can also see that I have my kiskas. Those are those instruments that we use to write on the egg with. There's my candle. That's very important. When you are using a kiska, you have to heat the beeswax in the candle. As you can see here, or on the right side of the candle, I have some templates that I use to help divide my eggs. Those are wonderful for penciling in the tops and bottoms. To divide your eggs with ease, you can use things like painter's tape, ones that don't stick, like the blue painter's tape. You don't want to get adhesive on the egg. You can use rubber bands, like these big vegetable and fruit rubber bands that you can get. You can use a tape measure. So here to the right of the black and those traditional colors, I have a few extra kind of glitzy colors. Pumpkin, pink, behind there is purples and a light blue and a dark blue and a turquoise. And these are all very beautiful, but you have to have specific color mixing knowledge to use those. Then very important is to have a complete jar of water to dip your spoons in. The spoons are the ones that you are going to be using to drop your egg into the particular dyes. And when you're done taking them out, you have to rinse them in the water. Always have lots and lots of paper towels on hand. I love Viva. Viva should be paying me. I promote them in every class I give. They really work well, and you can use them over and over again, especially if you designate a paper towel per color. Here you can see the candles. I bought these unscented candles from Michael's. They're kind of shorter, so you don't have to like burn down a long tapered candle, because you want them short enough for you to have your hand close to the egg. Here is a lathe. I bought this also at the Ukrainian gift shop as the templates. It's really a wonderful tool to help you pencil in the divisions on your egg. Those lines in graphite will disappear in the process of things, just like they do in our Zentangle string. They will actually wash away through the dipping in of the acidic baths, right? The dye baths. But here you can faintly see the lines, and I'm going to show you now how I actually drew them with a mechanical pencil, a hard pencil, and I'm just turning the lathe. And this way we also do not gum up the egg with maybe the adhesive on a tape or the dirt of a rubber band. So these are really, really cool. And I did not own one until about 10 years ago because I was teaching classes, but they're really nice. Now, if you take a look at this, these are some electric kiskas. They heat up the wax and let it flow smoothly so you can work more quickly. It's not traditional, and like with the lathe, I never had one of these until I started teaching classes, just so students could try out and see the difference between the traditional kitska and this. I must say, they are wonderful. The one drawback is they are very difficult to keep clean. And then there's an in-between kitska, and that has a, it's a little bit more streamlined with a brass funnel. Here you see too an implement that I use to clean out my kiskas that I bought at the Ukrainian gift shop. I also use bead weaving needles, very, very fine needles, to help unclog those kiskas that get filled up with carbon when they're over the flame. You see a stain remover that I use to help remove dripped wax on the eggshell. Sometimes you can remove a big blob of wax with an X-Acto knife or a knife, and then take a Q-tip and try to remove that with these stain removers. Not always will that dye still take, but sometimes it's successful. So it's worth trying out. So one last thing I'd like to mention are these little boards that you see here on the right side, the nails sticking up. You can get them also at the Ukrainian gift shop. I can't remember what they're called, but you lay your eggs on the top of those when you want to shellac them, and or if you want to remove the wax in the oven. So it keeps them elevated, then you turn them and you can give them another coat of shellac. Very, very handy. So with the help of my egg lathe, I'm going to show you division, the most basic division of the egg, which is A, in which we were making basically crosshairs on either end of our egg. And I'm going to use my lathe. What I've done, very important, is I've put my little nest of newspapers and paper towels underneath the lathe, because once in a while when you're doing this, your egg drops. And in that case, it will crack and you can't use it anymore. So I drop it all the time at this stage. So I like to pat it, getting it nice and tight, but try to position it so it's not going to be wobbly. And then once you get your egg in position, you tighten this screw. You use the rest that is part of the frame of the lathe to lay your hand on to keep it steady. And just lay your pencil on the midpoint and turn your lathe. And now we're going to just rotate the egg so that we do it again. So we've divided it in half that way, and now we're going to go this way. So that is basic division A. Now we need to divide the egg in the center so that we can make our bands. I'm going to divide it in half first, and then we're going to make 2 more bands on either side. So we want them to be large enough that we can easily draw our design in there. So let's say about that far, and I will measure it just to tell you. It's about 3/4 of an inch on either side. We're going to try to do one about the same distance a piece. Yours is going to probably be different because your egg is going to be a little bit different in size. So here I'm going to rest my hand on my frame and lay my pencil. I'm going to go backwards this time. And we're going to do an aura line because we're going to fill in this outer band with white just to give it a little more character. And now we're going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to turn my lathe and then the aura line. So I want to show you something here. there's a little line here, and I wouldn't normally even take that line off. You may not ever use an eraser to erase your lines, but if you get a line that you absolutely just can't live with while you're working, you can take a little bit of water and distilled white vinegar and dip a Q-tip in it and gently rub that line away. Drying it off with the other side. And there, that's how I would erase a pencil line. Now we've got it divided up this way. These are going to be our two bands. And then we're going to divide one more thing. So the egg that we're going to make is this one. And to divide these squares evenly so they meet up around the egg, and believe me, I have done this freehand and it just never works out. So we're gonna try to get as even as sections divided up here for these squares as we can. To do that, we've got our 4 basic lines, which is great because now all we have to do is divide these in half. And I'm just going to do it freehand. I'm not going to use the lathe. I'm just going to kind of pencil those in at the midpoint. So now we have 8 sort of squares instead of 4. This one I could probably bring over a little bit more. I'll just remember to correct that when I add my wax. So that's how we're going to divide our egg before we start actually writing on it with our wax. Before you actually start writing on your egg though, I would like you to try to practice a bit with your filling of your kistka and learning how the wax flows out of it, how to catch drips and blobs and keep it clean so that you don't drip and blob. This is a very difficult canvas to be writing on. It has no comparison to just picking up a pen and writing on paper or a pencil. To use the kistka, the traditional one, you're going to heat up the funnel and you're going to load it with your wax. And you want to keep this funnel, do you see how there's wax building up on it? I'm trying to keep that clean. I just wiped it off so that it won't eventually drip down on my paper or on my egg. So I've got it clean. I'm heating it up. That will make the wax flow well. And I've got a piece of newsprint paper here that I can use to just practice getting used to my kistka and how you really need to meet the eggshell perpendicular, straight on like that. You will find that it's great to practice some of the typical lines. Practice making some of those things like the net. You can practice your swirls, which you will find are much, much harder to do. Any curved line is much harder. So we're going to start our project. Our first project is going to be one where we have a lot of straight lines. And we're going to be making the traditional Ukrainian sun star. That looks like this. And very much like Zentangle, we turn our egg, in this case I'm turning the paper, but you will turn your egg to accommodate your stroke. So I like to do my strokes away from my body. I don't know if you like it better to pull your stroke. That's something you're going to have to determine on your own, what you feel most comfortable with. But once you decide, it's really great to keep the same direction of your stroke so that when you make things, they have that same balance, the same, just like when we're working with our pens or in Zentangle. So When you find that the flow is getting not quite as smooth, then you know that you need to heat your kistka. And there you have a nice smooth line again. So do get some paper out and practice this before you go on your egg. You will find that it's quite a bit different. And then we also have to deal with writing on the curve, right? It's curved surface. So don't be frustrated. Practice makes perfect. And I'm by no means a true professional Pysanky maker. I do this once a year. I learned it 40 years ago, but I did not make eggs every year. I only do it a couple weeks out of the year every so often. So the more you do this, the easier it gets. But it will be a little bit difficult in the beginning. So just stick with it and you'll get really good. Now let's go on our eggs. Here you can see I've already started writing my bands and the divisions with the kistka. All these lines that we're drawing are now going to be white because we're covering up the white eggshell. And that's going to save it from being dyed when we put it in the dye bath. You can see that I'm using a little bit different kistka than the one I did in the demo just a second ago. This one is the original traditional kistka that is wood with a copper handle or the copper funnel, and I love them. I think they work really great. Like I said, it doesn't clog up as much as the others do. Here I am just really thickening in the band, and this kistka is probably a medium-sized one. You could probably also use a large funnel one for this. And for dividing these lines, I'm using the medium-sized again. So the second design on our egg, also going to be in white because we haven't dipped it yet, are these X's. These X's are made with little wiggly lines so you can kind of practice how to deal with curves in a very small increment. And we're going to put these X's in the squares every other. So we're going to have alternating ones going every other also at the bottom of the second row as well. So here I want to show you something that happens to all of us. You see these little specks that I got on my eggshell. I was not working very neatly and got some wax on the paper towels below where I hold the egg, and then they rubbed off onto the eggshell. You can clean up that line or those drips and those little wax pieces by first rubbing them off with your fingernail or a knife or an X-Acto knife, and then dipping, like I showed you before, dipping a Q-tip into a vinegar water solution and rubbing that area so that the wax will take again. You have to make sure that it's really dry before you go back on there with your kistka. To keep your wax from dripping onto the egg, you do want to clean up that funnel ever so often with a paper towel. You can see too here that I have quite a bit of wax on my fingers, and that's not the greatest thing. What you don't notice is that I know how to hold the egg so that I don't rub that wax against the eggshell. I'm holding it with a completely different padded part of my thumb, so it's not really touching the egg. But if I were you as a beginner and you get your fingers that dirty, I would suggest you stop and clean them off. Here I'm drawing the ever popular 8-pointed star or sun. It's the symbol, of course, that means growth and good fortune and life itself, because the sun is the life-giving force. This is where you can begin to really start meditating on or praying for the Ukraine. The star symbol represents growth, so maybe we can pray for the resistance to this horrifying war to grow and bring good fortune to those who bravely defend their country. Now we turn our attention to the top and bottom of our egg and the little ornamentation there, which is sort of a flower symbol. And we need to remember that the flower symbolizes love, charity, and goodwill. And so again, you can meditate on that while you're drawing the flower. Now it's time to lay our egg in its first dye bath, which is going to be yellow in this case. Notice how I am tipping the jar so that I can lay the egg in there gently without dropping it to the bottom. You always want to avoid cracking whenever possible. So there we're going to have our egg rest for a good 10 minutes or so and check it and see if we think it's about ready to come out. Notice I have a paper towel ready to place the egg in when I carefully lift it out of the dye bath. And I take it in my paper towel and gently rub it dry, pat it dry, and put it in its egg carton to safely rest. You don't want to begin drawing on the egg right away after you've taken it out of a dye bath, because you'll notice the eggshell has gotten pretty cold and the hot wax will not take well to the cold eggshell. It will kind of resist, and you can get areas and pockets where the dyes can seep under. So you want the, before you actually begin marking your yellow lines, you want to make sure that the egg is warm. Sometimes I even just hold it in my hand for a few minutes and just heat it up so that my wax will flow smoothly. Here I'm continuing to draw the plant motif on both the top and bottom of the eggs, and we begin with these long tendrils that are a little bit anther-like. They are curled and swirled, and the curls, remember, represent defense and protection, a very good symbol for us to meditate on for our Ukrainian egg for peace. And we're going to do two different sizes, the larger one and then a smaller one on either side of that. This is where you can practice your curls and your curvy lines, which really do pose a challenge in the beginning. So you might want to get that newsprint out and do a few before you begin on your egg. Now we're going into this area next to the star in those little negative spaces in the corners, and we're doing some curls again, very similar to the ones we just did, but these are much smaller. So as you can see, I just changed my kiska up to a smaller, more precise one. So this little brass-headed kiska that's got the dendril body, it's like a plastic, it really does give you good precise line. I think the copper funneled ones just generally aren't rolled that tight. Sometimes you can get a really good one, but yeah, you can see that this is giving me a much more precise line than the one that I started with the other kiska. So now I've taken my light green dye, and rather than dipping the whole egg in the dye bath, I'm going to just blot with a paintbrush or cotton swab a small amount of the dye onto the egg where I want it to be green. Don't be concerned if some of this dye bleeds or smears around, because after we're done letting it really soak in and dry, we are going to add the wax on top where it should stay completely green. And in this case, it's going to be just a tiny dot. Sometimes I do put a second coat on after the first one dries, just to give it a nice saturated fill. So here I have gotten out my medium-sized Pysanky. It's the other one, it's the brass-headed one, but as you can see, it's a blue-handled one. So it's a little bit thicker, and so it lets larger areas like these bigger dots flow nicely. Notice that I have put a dot in the center of that green, and that's the only thing that's going to stay green. When you lay the egg in this orange dye bath, that other part on the outside of the dot is going to just wash away. So when we get our egg out, you will see that the green dots are these perfect little green dots. Notice how I'm warming up the egg a little in my hand. I got it out of the orange dye bath, and I always like to tighten the lids on the dye baths if I'm not using them, just number one, so I don't knock them over and spill them everywhere, but also to help keep the water from dissipating. Again, I'm making sure that this egg is nice and warm before I go on it with my Pysanky. Now that my eggshell has been warmed and my Pysanky filled, I can begin marking all of the places that I want to stay orange, like these dots. Remember that the dots also symbolize something very special. The dots symbolize the tears Mary cried for Jesus when he was crucified. They also represent stars and cuckoo bird eggs and rebirth because they are a symbol for spring. What I'm drawing here are little rakes. There's a rake on either side of this triangular section, and I'm doing the little tines right now. The rakes represent a successful harvest, and it's one of the very few man-made objects that appear on these eggs. Some of the other ones are the ladder, the sieve, the basket, combs, windows, and windmills. Here I'm showing you how to clean out the funnel when it gets clogged. You just take that fine needle or the little implements you can buy and poke it through until the wax comes out and flows freely again. Now I'm going in to fill in the rest of those triangular areas with what we would call a sieve. We're basically making a little net with crisscross lines, and the sieve is that symbol that is also a man-made object, but it is the separation of good from evil. Also very appropriate for our egg. So now you can meditate on that thought and you send your intentions and prayers while you make your egg. And here I'm just filling in the little star arms, the 8 triangular sections. Those will remain orange. And finally, I want to give a little more depth to these florets that we made, and we're going to fill in the centers with the darker orange. I mean, those lines that we are filling in will become orange. So that's the final step before we dip our egg into the next dye bath. Now that we've covered all of the sections we want to keep orange with the wax, we are ready to dip our egg in its final dye bath, which is dark red. So one last time, taking this out of its dye bath and patting it dry with paper towels and letting it warm up a little bit before we complete the egg in the final, most exciting part of Pysanky making, and that is the reveal. That's when we remove the wax and expose the designs. During this process, it's important to note you don't want to hold the egg directly at the top of the flame, but rather inside the flame where it's hottest. You want to take it in small sections, and when you are melting the wax, you want it to be shiny and look like wet when before you just wipe the wax away. And sometimes you'll have to take a couple of passes on the same section. That's not a problem. But do try not to hold it too long in the flame, or you will actually end up cooking the egg. You can risk carbon forming on the shell. And getting the carbon stains off the egg are really hard. You do want to do this carefully and with a completely padded workspace, because at this point sometimes people end up dropping their egg, either because they might burn their fingertip or the wiping makes them slip and drop the eggs. So just a word of caution to do this with mindfulness and slowly and carefully, and just enjoy it. So as I finish up here, I'd like to say that the last step is then, of course, to varnish your egg and or blow it out after you've varnished it, if you so wish. I can tell you that all of the colors become more brilliant with a glossy varnish over a matte finish. That's my preference anyway. The other thing I'd like to mention that I didn't say in the beginning is when I am making my Pysanky, I usually have several eggs going at once. So once one egg is dipped in the yellow dye, I start another egg with the white lines. You really do get quite a lot of them together if you work all day, because you're not just doing one egg and waiting for the dye to take. You're designing and creating while the other eggs are in the dye bath. So I hope you have a great time creating Pysanky for peace, and do keep in mind those prayers and intentions you wish to send as you are making these precious eggs. Thanks for joining me.